Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie, right?
Hey girl, hey, this is Ari.
So this week we're going to have what I think is a pretty important discussion. So there's lots of conversation about trans people in surgery, right? And the conversation is almost never a good or respectful one, because so oftentimes the conversation that you hear, people ask questions because they want to be shocked by the answers that they hear, not because
you had the surgery.
Right, the surgery, the singular surgery, because there's only one surgery that trans people ever have. But the question never really seems to be about, what does this actually do to improve your life? Why is it medically necessary? Why is it not actually just elective or cosmetic? Why is it important? So that's the conversation that I wanted to have this week. We have two guests on this week, one person who has been through some transition-related surgeries, and one person who is very, very close to. So I want to welcome our guests, Jason and Aubrey. Welcome to you both.
Hi,
Hello.
thank you.
So Jason, you have been through some of this. So if you could, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and kind of go through just what these things have done for you in your life.
Okay. So I had top surgery in June 2015, and then I had my hysterectomy December of 2015. And so going into top surgery, it was partly because binding is awful, and so I got a lot of pain from wearing, and it also just made me super uncomfortable. So,
and let's talk about binding for just a second, because there might be some folks who don't know what that is.
Okay. So binding, I wore kind of like a compression vest to flatten my chest, so it didn't look like breast, it just looked like a flat chest. And so one of the problems is that because it's so tight, it would cause pain, or it was just really hot. And so I think going into surgery, I didn't realize how much it weighed on me and how much it made me uncomfortable. It was definitely hard being around people during the summer, just because I felt like ostracized, not because of how people acted, just because I felt like everyone could enjoy the summer, enjoy swimming, and not have to think twice about what they were wearing, or have to worry about getting completely overheated just because of something that they had to wear. And so after surgery, I felt relieved. It was a sense of finally looking at something and feeling like that's what it should have looked like from the beginning, since I hit puberty. And so it definitely felt like this huge weight had been lifted. And after that, it became a lot easier just to be out in public and just definitely like talk to people, be in class. It was one of those situations where it wasn't like, it wasn't like a celebration coming out of it, I guess. It just felt like a big sigh of relief, because it had been years in the making to finally reach this place where I was comfortable with how something looked. And that definitely felt different than when I went in for my hysterectomy. My hysterectomy for me was something that's just a means to get to lower surgery. And so I was actually afraid because though it meant I could get to my end goal, I was definitely very scared about the fact that I was losing my reproductive organs, and it made it so I would never ever be able to have children. Coming out of surgery, though, I felt similarly to top surgery, and I felt relief that another, I guess, item on like a checklist had been completed, and I was so much closer to being in a body that felt mine. And I think that it's definitely helped a lot with my mental health. It's allowing me to look at goals other than transition and look at things like, what do I want to do school-wise, career-wise, family-wise. And it's really just allowing myself to live versus like fixating on what my body looks like.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, and when you say lower surgery, are you okay with sharing, what all that entails and what that means?
Yeah, for me, I am going with phalloplasty. And so what that is for me, they're going to take my arm, they're going to take a graft of skin and fat and an artery and nerve from my arm and construct a penis from it. And from that, they'll create the glands in that stage. They'll also close the vagina and create a scrotum. And then in a separate stage, I'll have a silicone testicle implant and then an erectile device that has a reservoir of like saline, I believe, so that I'll be able to have an erection, and then that's it. And so it creates a larger, like, average size phallus from my arm, and it's fully functional. I'll be able to pee standing up. Yeah.
So, and talk for a second, because I think as many myths and bad ideas as there are surrounding the types of surgeries that trans feminine folks go through, I think it may even be more so for the surgeries that trans masculine folks go through, because I know, and I actually learned other than this from hearing you talk about it. But, you hear so very often that, the surgery options for transmasculine folks just don't give good results, or that, it's not worth doing and all of that kind of stuff. And like, you hear these kinds of things all around. And I mean, it's something that I believed until, you posted a bunch of links up and I went and read about it and stuff like that. So can you kind of talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely discounted lower surgery for a while because of all the myths that were out there. So for transmasculine bottom surgery, there's two options. There's metoidioplasty and phalloplasty. Metoidioplasty creates a phallus from the growth that people gain on T in the clitoris. And with that, depending on your surgeon, you can have a vaginectomy and the creation of a scrotal sac and implants and stuff. And what that does is it creates just a less invasive procedure that there are plenty of people who are happy with. And I think the biggest myth around that is, because it's so small, people are never happy, and that's wrong. There are plenty of people who are happy with it. And then the huge myths around phalloplasty are that they don't function, they don't look like a penis. The complication rate is extraordinarily high. There's a good chance of losing like your entire phallus, and that's not true. I know specific to the information I have, there's less than a 1% chance that your entire graft will die. So there's less than a 1% chance that the entire penis will die. You'll have to get something else.
Right. So there's a risk, like there is with any surgery, but it's not some ridiculous, thing where you're taking this gigantic risk and all that.
No, I mean, it's a higher risk surgery than, say, like top surgery, but it's not this, if you go in, you're going to have these horrible, awful complications. Is there a chance for it? Yes, but there's a chance for that with any surgery.
Exactly.
And so, with it not being worth it, almost everybody who's ever undergone either of these procedures says it's worth it. I believe it's something like 97% of people who've had lower surgery say that it was worth it, even with complications that people have had. And then talking about function is very specific to each person. So some people, standing to pee isn't important. Having total erotic sensation throughout your entire neophallus isn't something that's that important. And so for me, since it was important, I opted to go with microsurgery, like a microsurgical flap, where they hook one of the nerves that they take from your donor site up to the nerves in your genital area, so that there is the entire sensation throughout the phallus. Same thing with standing to pee. Some people don't want to go through urethral lengthening because that does increase risks with surgery. And so it's just, if you want something, chances are you'll be able to get it. The only things that really can't happen right now are erections without the assistance of an erectile device, and creating a phallus that has foreskin is really the two major problems that are going to be there.
Which, I mean, thinking about what is possible to do, that's still pretty amazing. that whole thing can be done. I mean,
thank you, science.
Right. And so Aubrey, let's talk to you for a second. You are coming up very soon on a hysterectomy, right? That's what you told me?
Correct, in 20 days.
In 20 days. Okay, so this is super, super close. So talk to me about this. Why is this important to you, and what difference do you see this making in your life?
Well, the biggest thing with me for a hysterectomy is it's twofold. It's one, if I ever have to go off testosterone, the idea of menstruating again is just absolutely horrifying. The idea that I could be walking around and I'm almost 100% read as male by everybody I meet. So the idea of walking around and, having an accident on the back of my pants where I have blood through a pad or something like that, just completely unfathomable. I could not deal with that again. It just sets my dysphoria so high. And also, I have a very active sex life. I enjoy sex, but the idea of becoming pregnant is also just completely unthinkable. Couldn't deal with it. Could not go through that.
Right.
And since there's not really that much research on how testosterone actually works to prevent pregnancy, that it's not enough for me. Even I have a copper IUD right now. Even with that, and being on testosterone for more than a year, and using condoms, it's still just like, no, that risk is still too high.
Right. I hear you.
Astronomical risk is just like, no, I'm good.
Yeah. And so you mentioned, if you have to go off testosterone, can you talk about that for a second? Because people who listen to the show have heard me talk about the hormones, the hormonal stuff that I go through all the time. But I don't think there's been a ton of conversation about the transmasculine side of things. So like for me, for example, the hormones that I take, after I have SRS, I can stop my testosterone blocker, but after that, I still will have to take estrogen for the rest of my life, basically. And with transmasculine folks, that's not necessarily true, that you have to be on T basically forever, right?
Correct. You don't have to be on T, but like if you go off the T, your facial hair will get lighter and things like that. One doctor, I'm not 100% sure how much to trust him on this. He said it would be very similar to a postmenopausal woman. So just like, mood swings, things not functioning properly, and just all that stuff, especially if you've had a hysterectomy, and you're not getting any estrogen or a much lower amount of estrogen. So I can't really see any point where I would go off testosterone because I'm not afraid of needles. It doesn't bother me to inject it every week. But still, there's always that remote possibility. It's too hard to get a prescription. I move somewhere where I can't. I don't have any needles or whatever.
Right. That makes sense. And so you brought up something, because you brought up sex, right? And so,
ooh, sex.
So,
favorite topic.
and obviously, there is a lot of, there's a lot of stigma surrounding, trans people and sexuality, right? Because there's this narrative of us being, sexual deviants and perverts and that kind of stuff. And, I wrote a blog piece, kind of refuting that whole idea, and I think we can. What's that?
I said I read that. It was wonderfully written.
Oh, thank you. But there is a point where, like, I'm not afraid to admit that in some ways it is about sex, right? Because for some of us, obviously, there are people who are demisexual or asexual, and that's fine. But there are obviously those of us who, our sexuality is very important, and it's an important part of our lives, and it's an important part of the way that we share intimacy with our partners, and in an important way that we share affection with our partners. And I don't think it's so wrong to speak about that being one of the reasons that that people do these things, right? Because surgery is expensive, surgery is painful, it's sometimes it's radically life altering. I mean, there are certain surgeries that any trans person can go through that will mean that you can't reproduce ever. So you can never have a child that's biologically yours. Like, that's a huge, huge decision to have to make. And I think it's okay to call out, like, yeah, you know what? I like having sex, and this is going to make it easier for me and more enjoyable for me to have sex. That's obviously not all of what it's about, but I think it's okay to call out that that's part of it, right?
Yeah, I really couldn't agree with you more. I've always had an active sex life since I became an adult, and but ever since I started transitioning, even just with hormones, my sex life has been better than it's ever been, and I'm really excited about. I plan on personally getting metoidioplasty sometime down the line. Yeah,
that was going to be my next question, if there was any plan for that kind of thing.
Metoidioplasty, just because I like having vaginal intercourse as well. I don't particularly want to get a vaginectomy.
Okay, fair enough.
So, that wouldn't be a thing I would want. And currently, I don't know of any doctor that would give me phalloplasty without a vaginectomy. So,
gotcha.
There are doctors that'll do it.
Really? That is good to know.
Yeah. I know for sure Dr. Crane does phalloplasty with whatever combination of other surgeries without doing a vaginectomy.
I am going to friend you on Facebook after this is over, Jason, so we can talk about this more.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, because I would think if you're okay with if you're okay with what you've got, but why not get both if you can?
That'd be the dream for
Bonus.
me. So.
Right. And so, if it's okay, Ari, I want to put you on the spot for a minute here because so as a non-binary person, because obviously I identify pretty on the binary female, and at least our conversations with Jason and Aubrey are talking about the transmasculine side of things as far as physicality goes. But as a non-binary person, how does and obviously you're not speaking for every non-binary person because the whole idea is that everyone has.
I'm totally the ambassador of all entities.
Because obviously everyone is going to be different, just like not all trans women want, bottom surgery or breast implants and that kind of stuff. But, just in your own mind, where is your head at on that whole thing? Like, what do you have any goals as far as that kind of stuff goes?
Yeah, I do definitely want to have top surgery in the future. Unfortunately for me, right now, it's not really an option just because of all the money and time off work I would have to take. So it would definitely have to be, a few years down the line when I have a schedule or, the financial resources to be able to do that. Just because I do have some top dysphoria. But as far as bottom surgery, I'm not really terribly interested in that. I don't really have a lot of dysphoria about my private bits, so that's not really something I'm interested in at the moment, but it could change possibly. I don't know, but at the moment, nope, not interested.
Fair enough. So let's talk for a second about the idea that these surgeries are cosmetic or elective or any kind of term that's used to dismiss the necessity of these things, because I think we can say it on one hand, maybe the word elective is okay because it's not like I'm going to die tomorrow without SRS.
Right.
But the way that I kind of look at it is these things are like it's like eating. If it's got to happen for you, it's got to happen for you. You may have some choice over the time, when it happens or where it happens or how it happens, but that doesn't really change the fact that it has to at some point. So Jason, let's come back to you. Can you talk a little bit about that idea that, this might be something that not something that you need, but something that you want, and the kind of ideas like that?
If I didn't have to pay tons of money and recover and I would be able to be happy, that would have been wonderful. It would have saved us a shit ton of money.
Well, right, because surgery is so much fun, right?
Oh yeah, no, recovery is absolutely amazing, right? You're like in pain, have to take all these medications. But really, surgery has been the one thing that's been able to keep me alive. If it wasn't for the fact that I could have had these procedures or be able to access these, I don't know where I would be. Because dysphoria has been a very large part in my narrative.
You know, I'm a person who I've never been actively suicidal. I've never thought to myself, like, I really want to hurt myself. But the times where I have had those thoughts where, you know, like the scenario plays out in my head, not that I want to act it out, but just where, you know, when my mind goes there, it's almost always dysphoria that triggers it. And I think the best description I've ever heard of dysphoria when it gets that bad is it's like a cheese grater on your skin. Would everybody kind of agree with that metaphor?
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's and I think in a lot of ways it's kind of the same conversation as, you know, do you choose to be trans, right? And my response is to that, like, sure, like I thought tossing a hand grenade into the middle of my otherwise ideal life just sounded like a fun thing to try, right? And, you know, a lot of people don't realize, and I'm not sure, we'll talk in a second about this, but I know the trans women that I know who have had bottom surgery, they say that it can take up to a year to fully recover to where you really like feel normal and you feel like yourself again. And I mean that's being willing to sacrifice an entire year of your life in recovery for something like that, let alone the cost. I mean, even for folks who are lucky enough to have insurance cover it, there's still copays and everything, and that stuff can get really high.
And you have to take time off work for recovery, so you're losing income that way. Exactly.
So, so for the transmasculine side of things, for hysterectomy or for phalloplasty or metodoplasty, I think I said that right. What do the recovery times and stuff look like?
Well, for me personally, I've already got my paperwork through work finished. Like I said, I'm leaving in 20 days for my surgery. I will be taking off between 6 and 8 weeks. And I'm lucky enough that I have a full-time, steady job, and they're going to be giving me 60%, I think, of my income for the full 6 to 8 weeks.
Wow, that's awesome.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm very, very lucky. And I will still have a position when I get back in. I might have to transfer, but, you know, they said same position, same pay, everything like that, so...
And is this, you know, does and you don't have to say who your employer is, obviously, because, you know, we want to respect privacy, but does your employer know that you're doing this because you're trans and like they're okay with that, and it's covered the same way that a hysterectomy would be covered for a woman who wanted it?
Yeah, it's all covered. They're moderately respectful. Like they're like, oh yeah, that's really weird, but cool, go ahead, do whatever you want to do. That's kind of how they're handling the whole thing, the whole way up.
Well, I guess it could be worse, huh?
yeah. At least they're like cool after the weird part. So
right. And Jason, what do you expect as far as recovery times for the phalloplasty? Do you know about how that works?
So it's a huge recovery. So you have to be in town. So I plan on going with Dr. Crane or Dr. Chen in San Francisco. So I have to be in San Francisco for at least a month. Phalloplasty is a 2-stage procedure, and so I've heard it takes about a year to feel okay, and that's from people who haven't had implants or anything yet. And so, but when it comes to sensation, everything being actually like at full, you know, steam, it can take years for things to recover. But I've heard people feel normal about a year and a half.
Fair enough. And if you obviously don't have to reveal anything that you're not comfortable with here, but if one would have to pay out of pocket for that, because that's the situation that many trans people are faced with, what does something like that cost?
So our insurance, we don't know if it's going to cover it or not. I'm hoping that because the surgeon I'm going with is contracted with the insurance company I have, that it'll more than likely be covered. If not, it's going to set us back about $100,000.
Holy shit! Wow. I mean that's on par with like open heart surgery.
It's going to cost more than my entire undergrad education.
Yeah, because I was about to say how much trans feminine folks spend on surgery, which is still a pretty ridiculous amount. But I think taking advantage of every single surgery that a trans feminine person has available might approach that. I
talked to one of my doctors about it one time, and I believe his exact words were, "It's easier to dig a hole than build a pole," which is why trans masculine surgeries are more expensive than the trans feminine surgeries.
Oh God, it's crude, but I guess that works. Oh God.
And there we have an example of a funny transgender joke.
Right. Hey friends, I wanted to let you know about something cool that listeners of the show may be interested in. A good friend of mine is doing a fundraiser for an organization called the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network seeks to advance the principles of the disability rights movement with regard to autism. ASAN believes the goal of autism advocacy should be a world in which autistic people enjoy the same access, rights, and opportunities as all other citizens. They work to empower autistic people across the world to take control of their own lives and the future of their common community, and seek to organize the autistic community to ensure their voices are heard in the national conversation about them. Their motto is "Nothing about us without us," which is something I can totally sympathize with, given the lack of trans representation in so much that affects our community. To learn more about the fundraiser and to contribute, jump on Facebook and search for a group called Autism Acceptance Month Fundraiser. It's an awesome cause, and I hope you'll check it out and contribute if you're able. Thanks!
The Brainstorm Podcast presents The Shift to Reason, Saskatchewan's first secular conference. It's happening on April 30th, 2016, and features some great speakers that include Seth Andrews, Nate Phelps, and Leveda Leaning, along with others. This one-day event in Regina includes lunch and a VIP after-party with the speakers. Tickets are available at shifttoreason.eventbrite.ca and start at $95 for early bird tickets, with student pricing and limited VIP tickets. Keep up to date with the conference on our Facebook page, facebook.com/shifttoreason.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Brittany, David, and Rachel. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to cool stuff like a big shout out on the show, premium content including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Being on the transmasculine side of things, I'm sure there's probably a lot of stuff that I wouldn't even consider. Something that I always like to do on the show is, when I'm talking to somebody who has an experience that's not mine, that I don't necessarily have a reference for, I always like to ask you, is there anything that you think is important to talk about that we haven't discussed that, because I'm not in that position, I might not even think to ask the question?
I definitely feel a lot of, pressure from, cis masculinity about what my penis is going to look like.
Yeah.
Which is weird, because there are different donor sites, and you can get larger penises, or you can, and it was definitely in my mind still trying when I was still trying to decide what my donor site was going to be, and was I really going to risk having an extra 10, 12% complication rate just to have something that was larger. I definitely feel like there's pressure for that's making this, or has made it, a little more difficult. And also the fact that I'll have to have some kind of device, like to have an erection or something. There are things, definitely the limitations of what happens, that are definitely kind of sobering, especially like, oh, I'm going to go through this entire procedure, I'm going to pay this money, and at the end of the day, there are still going to be these things that can't happen. There are still going to be these differences between my anatomy and some cis guy's anatomy. And I definitely feel like I'm trying to get those feelings out and process those now before I have to have surgery. Because it's going into this with the clear headspace is definitely something that's important.
Yeah, well, and that's something that I think about a lot too, because, you know, as woke as any of us think that we are, right? I think a lot of times it's really hard to tell the difference between, you know, when we think about these kind of things, it's really hard to tell the difference between doing it because of societal pressure or doing it because it's something that we actually want for ourselves. And I think it's really, really tough sometimes to sort those feelings out and figure out which is which. Is that kind of a struggle that you've had?
Definitely, because especially when I was still trying to decide about what route I want to take in general with my transition, with hormones, with surgery. It was definitely one of those things about, why, especially with like body positivity, why can't I just be happy with what I have? Like, I know that there are different bodies for different people. Like, not all men have the same exact type of body, but there was still that I want my body to look like that though.
Right.
And at this point, I've just resolved myself to the fact that it honestly doesn't matter why I want my body to look the way I do. What I do know is that it needs to look like that. And since I'm able to, I should probably take the steps to make it look like that so that I'm, in general, a happier, more adjusted person.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I've come down to, like, because I do have those same struggles, you know, is this societal pressure speaking to me, or is this my own self speaking to me? And I think at the end of the day, I'm not 100% sure that it matters that much, because if that voice is so loud in your head telling you what you feel like you should be doing, I don't know that that's something that you're going to be able to just push away and get rid of, you know, because that seems straying dangerously close to the voice in my head that told me not to come out, right? That told me that I was wrong for feeling the way that I did about my gender identity in the first place. That, you know, I was born with a penis, therefore I'm a guy, therefore you can't wear dresses, therefore you can't wear nail polish. Like, the whole, you know, that whole fight that you have with yourself when you're in the process of trying to figure out who you are. And, you know, I've thought about that a lot in my own situation, because I'm one of the few trans women I've ever heard. I have struggled more with dysphoria surrounding my chest than I ever have my penis. I want bottom surgery. I'm going to get bottom surgery, but I've actually felt more dysphoria, more discomfort, and more sort of, you know, emotional angst surrounding my chest than anything else. And I have that same conversation with myself. You know, do I want big boobs because society tells me that I'll be beautiful if I have them? Or do I want them because that's actually what my body expects to be there and what my body wants to be there? And I've gone back and forth a lot. And I think, Jason, I've kind of come down into the same spot you have, you know, regardless, thinking about it this much and knowing what I do about what the surgery looks like, what it costs, what the recovery time is, how much pain is involved, and all that kind of stuff. If in my head I'm still saying I want these things, I'm not sure that it totally matters, because like you said, it's going to make me more comfortable in my own skin. It's going to make intimacy easier. It's going to make me more confident in my appearance. And as much as we all want to discount the value of appearances, you know, to some degree they do matter, right? And as much as we all understand that the idea of cisnormativity is a problem, at the end of the day, if that's what you want for yourself, that's what you want for yourself. And I'm not going to shame someone who wants that for themselves, as long as it's not simply because of the societal ideal, right? Because that societal ideal is harmful. Not everyone wants cisnormativity for themselves, and people should be free to not have that. But for folks who do, who want to look as masculine as possible, as feminine as possible, and I'm one of those people. I want to look, I want to be able to pass in society as a cis woman, because that's what I feel. That's what makes the most sense to me for myself. And I think at the end of the day, kind of bringing it around, that's what surgery is for, right? It's not about vanity. Maybe there's a little touch of vanity because we're changing our physical appearances for one reason or another. But I think at the end of the day, what it's about is it's about making you more comfortable in your own skin, and more comfortable with who you are and how you present to the world and how you interact with your partners and intimacy and that kind of stuff. So that was a really long rant.
That kind of gets back to the idea that we were talking about before about, are these surgeries elective or are they life-saving? I think there's kind of a middle ground there as well. For me personally, if I never have top surgery, it's not going to be the end of my life. But if I do have top surgery, I'm definitely going to feel more comfortable in my body. I'm definitely going to feel happier all around. I'm not going to have to deal with binding. And, binding can only go so far in terms of how flat it makes your chest look. So even if you do bind, it's not, 100% where I want it to be. So for me personally, and I think this goes for a lot of non-binary people, but even a lot of binary people as well, who don't necessarily conform to the cis standards of what they want their body to look like, it's kind of a mixture. It's not a surgery that I absolutely 100% have to get or I'm going to die, but it's also going to be a huge positive benefit to my quality of life.
Yeah, well, I think like almost anything trans, it comes down to being a sliding scale, right?
Right.
Because obviously it's important to point out that not all trans people have any desire at all for surgery, or physical transition of any kind, for that matter, and it doesn't make them any less valid. Obviously, we're just having this conversation about the folks that do. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good thing to point out. And for some people, it's a want, not a need.
I think it kind of works into a concept that one of my partners actually introduced me to. Gender dysphoria is what I have. I'm very, very uncomfortable with my body when I look at it. I'm not happy. I want to get it changed. But then there's also gender euphoria, which I've heard more than a few people say that, like, they're okay with their body, but they would be just thrilled if they could change it in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But, on the other side, like Jason was talking about earlier, I mean, there are people who have ended their lives because the pain of living in the body that didn't match what they felt was so bad that living wasn't worth it because of that. And I think that's that's kind of, if I can point any one message out about this, is for the people who do feel that need. It's not a matter of vanity or a matter of, well, this is just something that would be neat to have. It is a very real and valid medical need. And that's not just me talking. That's the medical community talking. The people who are experts in this stuff and the people who study this stuff say very, very plainly that for people who need transition-related medical care, because again, not all people do, but for people who do need it, it's as valid a necessity as any other care. It's no less valid than flu medicine or open heart surgery or insulin for diabetes. Like it's no different than any of that. And the other thing that I think is important to point out is, I think anyone at all remotely familiar with trans issues understands that there is a higher instance of mental illness among trans people. And I think that's true for almost any minority group. I would just Google the phrase minority stress to figure that one out. But there are people for whom those struggles and those feelings either dissipate or disappear completely after surgery, because that discomfort is what caused the problem in the first place. Mm-hmm. So for the people who need it, this is not just, it's not even just a quality of life thing. It's a matter of life. So yeah.
Bottom line is, trans people are all different.
Yeah. So, and Aubrey, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Jason. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think might be important to point out or important to talk about, or, something that we haven't talked about that, like, if you could tell a bunch of non-trans people, one thing about this topic, what would it be?
I mean, Jason covered it pretty well. Pretty much everything he said I would hit on, but kind of also going into the whole body positivity thing that he was talking about, there are a lot of circles who are just like, in a lot of trans circles, are like, okay, you don't need to have surgery and stuff like that. You can just bind if you want to, and when you don't, and stuff like that. But I think in an intersectionality of, being fat, like, I am overweight. I'm a size 48 in pants. I weigh like about 260 pounds. I can't really bind 100%. Like, I can't do it. When I wear a binder, it works a little bit, but because my stomach is so large, any binder either doesn't fit over my stomach, or it does, and then it doesn't compress on my chest enough. So I have to get surgery to be able to even pass for male without wearing very baggy clothes or making myself very, very uncomfortable all the time.
Yeah, that's important to talk about too. I mean, because that's something that I've talked about too. I mean, I'm obviously I'm a very, very overweight person, and one of my big struggles has been losing weight because I've yet to find a surgeon who doesn't have a pretty strict weight requirement for people that they'll do bottom surgery on. So I've got like 200 pounds to lose before. I have insurance. I have insurance that'll pay 90%, and really great medical leave and everything like that from my work. But my weight is in the way of me even getting the surgery in the first place. So that's something that I struggle a lot with, that I've talked about on the show. So Ari, did you have any parting thoughts? Anything else that you wanted to say on the topic before we wrap up here?
Just another NB rant, of course. A big problem in this area for non-binary people especially is medical gatekeeping, which is basically the idea that the doctors can basically tell you like what you do and do not need in terms of surgery. So there are some surgeons and doctors out there who will not do surgeries or hormones for non-binary people because they're not quote-unquote trans enough.
Because you have to pick one before...
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, God.
So this is... I think recently it's becoming less of an issue because I think people are just getting more educated on the fact that there are more than two genders, and that you don't have to pick one in order to be a valid trans person. But it's definitely still an issue with even people who want to have surgery, have all the money, have the insurance, have all of the support they need. They can't get it because they can't find a surgeon who is willing to do it on a non-binary person. Or they have to lie and say that they are binary in order to get the surgery.
Right, which, like, being forced into the position of lying to your medical professionals is, like, that's totally a thing that you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand why they need to know that in the first place. I guess their reasoning is that they don't want to perform an unnecessary surgery, or they don't want to perform a surgery where the person's going to come back and say that they're unhappy with it and it was a hasty decision. But that's a completely separate thing from that person's gender identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason and Aubrey, thank you both very, very much for joining us. This is obviously an intensely personal thing, and I'm always kind of skittish about asking people to talk about this kind of stuff because it is a super personal thing, and there's lots of stigma and everything like that. So I seriously appreciate both of you coming on the show to talk about your experiences.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Again, want to thank my guests, Jason and Aubrey, for being so open and honest with their stories. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie.
Before I give my contact information, I'd like to give a little plug that I am going to be a guest on our sister podcast, No Religion Required, on Sunday, April 3rd. It goes live 7 p.m. Eastern, but you can download it anytime after that. And I'm going to be talking about the science of gender and sexuality. So now that I've got that out of the way, I'd like to give my contact information in the form of a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a teeny tiny tree frog. His name was George, and he thought that he was the cutest living being in all the land. But George was a good skeptical frog, so he knew that he needed to test his hypothesis. He gathered his 3 best friends, Barry the bear, Kitty the cat, and Mitch McConnell the alligator snapping turtle. He asked them each to name who they thought was the cutest living being in all the land, besides George, of course. Barry the bear said to George, "I bet it's Princess Glitterfart the unicorn. She has a long flowing mane, a sparkly horn, big wide eyes, and a Beanie Baby collection." George agreed that she was adorable, but he decided to save his judgment until he heard all his friends' opinions. Kitty the cat went next. She said, "Princess Glitterfart is nice, but I think the cutest creature is Squiggles the squirrel. He has a bushy tail, a cute little nose, teeny smushy paws, and he thinks that anarcho-capitalism is a viable economic system." George the frog also agreed that that was pretty cute, but he still had to hear Mitch McConnell, the alligator snapping turtle's opinion. "Well," said Mitch McConnell, "I think it's Ari Coleman. They co-host a podcast and they wear size 3 shoes." "That's interesting," said George, "but I've never met Ari, so I don't know how adorable they are." So Mitch McConnell got on his Facebook, typed Ari Coleman in the search bar, and pulled up Ari's profile to show George. "Ugh," said George when he saw their picture. "Definitely not. I'm going to go with Princess Glitterfart on this one." And they all lived happily ever after until climate change took their natural habitat. The end. Round of applause, everybody.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Taking it out.
Good God. And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gatheists. If you want to support the work that we do, support the activism that we do, you can go to patreon.com/thegatheist manifesto. Make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. Makes a huge difference, makes it possible for me to do all the traveling and all the speaking and all that kind of stuff that I do. If financial support isn't a thing that's in the cards, that's totally cool. I understand. You can still go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. That helps us get heard by a lot more people and helps the show grow. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gatheist Manifesto.